10:03, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I think that we will have more people join us as we are in the early stages today. But thank you again for being with us today. This is the second webinar in our Getting Ahead of Climate Trauma, Tribal Wellbeing Adaptation Webinar Miniseries. And if you were with us for our first go-round with Dr. Douglas Walker, he's actually here today as an attendee listening in. And if you, excuse me, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, let us know, who you are, where you're joining us from, and if you were part of that first webinar, if you have any comments or recollections or anything that you'd like to put in the chat about that experience, we'd love to hear from you. And I'm just going to transition it over to Angie right now so that she can do a little bit more ground setting for what we're going to have today.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to talk to you for a couple minutes about what it is we're here to do together today. Those of you that were with us last time, we'll just do a quicker version of what the purpose of this series is and who we are. And so the purpose of our Wellbeing Adaptation Series is to exchange strategies, knowledge, and skills that tribal serving professionals can bring back to your community. So you might learn some things that are supportive and helpful for yourself as an individual and as a professional doing this work. But the intention is that you can actually go back and help build some of these strategies into your adaptation work at home. We also hope that at the end, you feel a little bit more able to protect well-being and adapt to growing stressors and trauma associated with climate change, feel a little more prepared to prepare, cope, and recover from traumatic climate events. And this type of work, I don't think in 3 short webinars, we're going to get you to the point where you're maybe seeing tangible results of minimizing the need for formal mental health treatment, but that's generally where we're trying to get to. These strategies can help get ahead of the trauma in a way that you are more resilient, more prepared for these events when they hit. And in general, build more mental, psychosocial, and spiritual resilience. So if you were with us last time, you were with us for our guest speaker, Dr. Douglas Walker from Mercy Family Center, who spoke to us about what does climate stress and trauma look like to tribes. Today, we're so fortunate to have Bob Doppelt from the Resource Innovation Group, and I'm going to introduce him a little bit more in just a moment. And since you're registered with this series, we have one more, and we hope you'll join us for that too, and that will be featuring Elaine Miller-Karras and other folks from the Trauma Resource Institute, including she's going to be moderating a panel of tribal representatives who have actually facilitated and practiced the community resilience model within their communities. And so today, I do want to just reiterate, we'd love to hear from you. Your name, your organization, and location. And if you're comfortable sharing any reactions or thoughts you had after our last webinar with Dr. Douglas Walker. Just any thoughts, anything that occurred to you afterwards. We'd love to hear it. Throw that in the chat just briefly. So I'm going to hand it off to Bob Doppelt in just a moment. For folks that weren't with us last time, just a really quick introduction for Shasta and I. Shasta, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Shasta Gaughan. I am the Environmental Director and the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Pala Band of Mission Indians in Payoncoachum territory, which is now called San Diego. It's Luiseno territory. And I'm delighted to see you all here today and recognize most of the names, and hope to get to know you all a little bit better through today's webinar and some of our other webinars and training opportunities.
And my name is Angie Hacker. I'm with Prosper Sustainably. We do consulting for tribes and other communities across the country, and I've been doing this work, sustainability work, including climate work, for about 20 years at the community scale. And so one thing I took from the last time we got together was that conversation we had about translating COVID response practices and lessons to climate change. That was really useful, and I'm using some of those responses to inform a little summary report that I'm doing on some research to help other tribes also think through how they could possibly strengthen and brace for climate and prepare themselves for climate emergencies using some of the lessons learned from COVID. So thank you for that. Okay. And just briefly who we are and how the organization works. So Paula Band of Mission Indians, that's where Shasta works. She is the director of the Paula Environmental Department. They lead the Tribal Climate Health Project, which is how we are offering this educational series with federal funding. And Prosper Sustainably is hired to help administer that program. And so this is one of many trainings we've offered. We invite you to simply go to tribalclimatehealth.org to take advantage of all of the trainings that we've offered in the past, along with companion tools that can help you fact find and find data and information a little bit easier, and other resources, surveys. There's a lot of different materials there. We welcome you to peruse around tribalclimatehealth.org. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to today's guest speaker. So that's not true.
Hi, Douglas. Hi, Douglas.
That's Bob, but it's not Douglas Walker. So this is Bob Doppelt. He is, and it's not a directory, so clearly that was not the right slide for me to share with you, but so he is the executive director of the Resource Innovation Group. And what I actually wanted to do was talk to you a little bit more about the other kinds of things he does. He teaches at the University of Oregon, where he teaches systems thinking and global warming, planning and policy. He's also a trained counseling psychologist and environmental scientist, and a longtime meditation teacher. And he wrote a book, several books, but recently, more recently, one called Transformational Resilience, which I read and I highly recommend. So I'm going to hand it off to you now, Bob, to present on your own screen. And I also want to point you folks to this, what I'm sharing on my screen right now, which is a recent article he wrote about preparing for climate overshoot requires quickly expanding our mental health system. All right, off to you, Bob. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to both of you. Let me see if I can get my screen share to work. Okay, there we go. Nice to meet you all, or see you all, at least in chat, and to some of you by pictures. My name is Bob Doppelt, and I do direct coordinate the International Transformational Resilience Coalition. That's where most of my work has gone now. We are a global network of mostly mental health, social service, and faith leaders, with other climate leaders joining, that are trying to build awareness of the need and providing specific skills and approaches and policies to build universal or population level mental wellness and resilience for the climate emergency. And I'm going to tell you why we're focused on that and what we're proposing and have come up with as we go through this. But let's start with, can't get these things to move. Let's see here. There we go. Skipped. All right. Let's start with what we call a resilience pause before I get into the information. And just to sort of, you probably were running around this morning doing things before you joined the webinar. So just take a moment to calm yourself by using whatever methods you normally use. Maybe it's just taking some gentle, deep breaths and just watch yourself breathing for a moment. Without trying to change anything, without trying to make anything happen. You can also use body-based skills. For example, you can just sort of scan your body and just sort of sense pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensations. And when you sense unpleasant sensations, just deliberately shift your attention to a place in your body that feels pleasant, that nice tingling, nice warmth. So just take a moment to do that. Couple of nice deep breaths if that's style. And then as you do that, just sort of think for a moment, how do you normally calm your body, mind, and emotions when you're distressed? Do you normally pay attention to the need to do that? Are you normally aware of when you're distressed? And when you do become aware, what do you do to calm your body, mind, and emotions? And if you're comfortable doing so, please share your approach to calming yourself when you're distressed. Share it in chat. We won't read it now, but we may come back and we're going to do a few more resilience pauses. We might have you read some of what you share down the road in chat. Well, learning skills to calm our body, mind, and emotions, and I want to emphasize body and mind and emotions, because actually when we're stressed, as most of you know, or all of you undoubtedly know, it's actually a biopsychological, physical reaction. It's not just an emotional or mental reaction. But this is really important because trauma and toxic stress are, as we all know, at epidemic levels today. The pandemic has made everyone much more fearful of health impacts and many other things, even being near others that might have be transmitting the issues. But it's racism and other sorts of historic and systemic oppressions that have been risen to the top. There's violence out there or fear of it. The loss of close family connections and social bonds that the pandemic has amplified. High poverty and unemployment among many, especially among tribal members. Loss of cultural wisdom, traditions, and spirits, and many other kinds of distresses at the personal, family, and community and cultural level. And I think you all know this. I'm not saying anything that none of you know. Is that even before the pandemic, Native American and Indigenous people really experienced psychological distress at about 2.5 times the rate of the general population. But for many reasons, access to mental health care is very limited. And we can, in the discussion we'll have at the end, we can talk about those factors if that's important. And intersectionality aggravates those traumatic stresses. And if you don't know what intersectionality means, it's where different kinds of traumatic stressors feed back on each other. And Native American and Indigenous people and other BIPOCs, Black and Indigenous people of color, experience numerous historic and ongoing traumas that feed back and interact with each other. And the interactions between the historic and ongoing racism and violence and inequalities, inequities, and poverty, et cetera, produce intensified forms of traumas that the field of psychology is able to or has defined, but also all sorts of new types or different types of traumas that the field of psychology doesn't define well, because we're sort of stuck in our own mental models and don't connect with tribal or different cultural approach models. But intersectionality makes building the capacity for wellness and resilience more important than ever. And it's important to remember that Native Americans, First Nations people, are incredibly resilient on their own, or they wouldn't be here, given all the traumas and violence that they've experienced. And that resilience often comes in very unique forms that the mental health field doesn't, that those unique forms allow them to withstand all sorts of extreme traumas that other people wouldn't necessarily be able to really withstand. So the key question is, what are those factors that enhance resilience to all sorts of traumas? And how can they be enhanced, or new ones reconstructed, old ones reconstructed, new ones built for other traumas? And that's what I want to dive into today, more importantly. And this is important because we're really in the midst of a civilization-changing event, a mega emergency. The science shows that we cannot prevent global temperatures from exceeding the 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, 1.5 degree Celsius temperature threshold that the best science shows is going to activate very irreversible very serious and possibly irreversible impacts. And more research is showing that that might happen this decade or soon thereafter. The World Meteorological Association last year predicted that. But it's not just greenhouse gas emissions causing the problem. It's also biodiversity and ecosystem crisis. And under current emissions path, we're going to see abrupt collapses of ecosystems and catastrophic loss of biodiversity before 2030 down in the southern tropical oceans, and then it's going to move northward. And so we have to get our heads around the fact that we are in the midst of a civilization changing mega emergency. And if we are unprepared for that, it's going to generate individual and collective traumas at a scale we have not seen. A word for that is we're entering a new era called the trauma scene. It's a new geological era, if you will, where people are just going to be traumatized more and more. And that's on top of all of the traumas, historic and ongoing traumas that First Nations, Native American people experience and other Americans. So what are some of those impacts? The most important impact, people normally think of climate change and they think of these big disasters. That's important. I'll get to that in a second. But the most important one mirrors what we saw with the pandemic in a small way, and that is cascading and surprising disruptions to vital ecological, social, and economic systems that we all rely on for food, water, shelter, safety, health, et cetera, jobs, incomes. And as those things get disrupted, as those core systems get disrupted, we all experience significant toxic stress, severe stress. Everyone has experienced that, although people of color, Native Americans, low-income populations experience it worse, more difficultly, and more earlier, but then everybody gets experiences. So we're already seeing around the US, and our members are global, we see it around the internationally, food and water and power shortages and other resource disruptions, new illnesses and diseases, loss of place, community, and culture, loss of the natural environment. And we found that right here where I live in Eugene, Oregon, just last year. We might likely to see it again this year with this huge drought we're in, record drought. Involuntary migration, being forced to move because there's no food, water, or the area is burned up. And then in-migration, people coming into your community that forced housing costs up, et cetera, job and income losses, crime, aggression, violence, all these kinds of things are parts of these toxic stress pileups. And then, unlike the pandemic, added to this are going to be more frequent, extreme, and prolonged disasters that traumatize millions of people. About 47 million Americans every year are experience an extreme disaster. And the Oak Ridge National Lab last year predicted that that number is going to at least double, roughly 100 million a year. Well, that's almost a third of the population of the US every year. And 20 to 50% of the people who experience are directly impacted by a disaster can experience mental health problems. And even those people who know someone who's impacted, a family, a friend, or watch it from afar can be impacted. And again, low income and marginalized populations are often hit hardest. So what happens? What's the effects of the combination of those ongoing relentless stresses and these acute traumas that happen with disasters? So that's my picture for a person who has stress in their body. And sometimes it's a headache, you can see, and then the lines, their shoulder aches, your neck aches, you got respiratory problems. Some people get stomach problems, they have problems in their hands, their feet, et cetera, et cetera. That's all of us. Everyone experiences some kind of problem in our body, some symptoms in our body as a result of stress. And let's see if I can get, yep, okay. And what's going on? Again, I'm not telling you anything you all don't know. We're really having a stress reaction from the release of hormones, neurochemicals into our bloodstream. That is a natural reaction by our fear and alarm center of our brain, the amygdala, to prepare us to fight back or flee the scene when we sense a threat of some kind. When it's overwhelming, we end up freezing, and it produces a physical reaction, increased blood pressure, pulse rate, et cetera, but also a mental reaction, excessive worry, fear, et cetera. Those are actually helpful adaptations for humans to stress. That's how we have built our capacity to ward off threats. 10,000 years ago, it mostly was a threat of a predator that might eat us. Now it's a threat of somebody saying the wrong thing to us, speeding cars down the road, or losing a job, loss of self-esteem, et cetera. And we all experience that. This is common. This is what life is about. But normally we're all able to release that stress reaction or discharge it when the threat is no longer present, or we realize it's not present, or we find ways to do that. But if we don't discharge that stress, what began as a helpful, when that stress reaction is always ongoing, we all often adopt maladaptive coping mechanisms. We try to numb ourselves from the feeling, the distress we feel, or escape from it by using drugs, abusing drugs, food, tobacco, and other sorts of things. Or we try to seek relief through diversions. We become hypervigilant. We get on social media. We use electronic video games. Or we turn our distress on others and try to project it outward. So we take it out on our spouses or our children or significant other, or we become aggressive towards other people or violent. Or we can dissociate. We can disconnect with what's happening, deny it's happening, and neglect. And that often leads to what we call reenactment, because we're denying it's happening. So we continue to repeat the same patterns that caused the problem in the first place, and we just continue getting this vicious cycle, all of which leads to less ability to cope and problem solve and enhance our well-being and deal with environmental problems. Most of us experience this kind of maladaptive coping at some point in our lives. It's a very natural reaction, but we get ourselves out of it. It might last an hour or two. It might last a day or two. Maybe it's a week. We had a really bad week. We just drank too much alcohol. And then we said, nah, I'm going to stop this. And you allow yourself to go back into a healthier state. If it continues, however, we end up with all-encompassing breakdown, or can end up that way. We have physical health problems that a result of stresses. Many doctors don't even get this, that many of what the problems they're seeing are actually related to ongoing stress and traumatic reactions. There's psycho-emotional problems, anxiety, depression, et cetera, spiritual problems, including hopelessness. And that's what we see as the most pressing problem already with the climate emergency: increased hopelessness around the world. Cognitive problems, we can't remember things. Behavioral problems, as we talked about, again, less ability to cope and problem solve and enhance our well-being. And if many people experience that all-encompassing breakdown and those maladaptive coping mechanisms, what you end up is with social breakdown: high distrust, despair, and hopelessness, low empathy and compassion, authoritarianism and extremism, and people say, I'm the one, we're the people that can solve this problem, and they're the cause of it, leading to we versus them polarization, lots of violence and aggression, no concern for the environment, natural environment, or the climate, and again, less ability to problem solve and increase well-being. And that, of course, comes back to create more external stressors, which creates or stress reactions. So we're already seeing this in many ways throughout the US and internationally also. Sometimes it's connected to or indirectly or directly connected to the climate emergency. And many other times there's a lot of other factors involved there, but we can see that happening. So I want to take just another short resilience pause. That information that I just shared can be pretty distressing. So just sort of take a moment again and use whatever tools you normally use or methods to just calm yourself, take a breath and go, oof, just let that go. And just take a moment just to find a way to calm your mind and your body and emotions. And as you do that, just sort of notice, have you ever experienced any of the traits just described? Do you ever find it very difficult or impossible to release that stress reaction? Do you ever adopt maladaptive coping mechanisms? Have you had physical health problems that you think are related to those stress reactions? And if so, how is it that you become aware of them when they happen? And how do you respond? How do you notice them? Or do you notice them? And how long does it take for you to notice those reactions? Does it happen instantaneously? Is it a day later? 2 weeks later, you realize, oh man, was I distressed? And what do you do when you notice that? And if you would, if you're willing, and only if you're willing, just share that, your reaction in chat. Do you personally notice any of these traits? What I just described is sort of a trauma-informed individual, trauma-caused individual that leads to trauma-organized groups and organizations and communities. We organize our activities around trying to protect ourselves from trauma. That's what being trauma organized means. And it ends up causing more problems. So just share anything you're willing to share in chat, if you will. Well, we really need to begin to think about how we can approach these kind of problems, knowing that the disasters and relentless toxic stresses are going to grow worse. And to do that, we need to really think in a very new way and act in a very new way to prepare for the new era that I call the trauma scene. And our disaster response, our mental health, our psychosocial support systems that I was trained in, that many of you are trained in or work in, we know most of them are crisis and illness-focused systems. They do not strengthen existing or establish new protective factors that prevent and help heal repetitive, cumulative, intersectional traumas. And it's important to also realize that there is no society. Do some research on your own. I've done extensive research, and our team did on this. There's no society that has ever achieved health and wellness with individualistic approaches alone, which is quite a bit of what our mental health system focuses on. Collective or communal prevention and healing are always central to wellness and resilience. But that focus on this individualistic approaches is really why our current disaster and mental health systems just cannot prevent or heal today's psychological, emotional, or behavioral problems, and has zero chance of preventing or healing those generated by the trauma scene. And we can talk about that in next. So what we really need to do is shift to a public health and prevention science approach. And we need to do this very quickly. And many of you are already doing this kind of work. But public health approach addresses problems by strengthening protective factors, including the skills, strengths, and resources people need that counter health and wellness. A public health approach takes a population level approach, not one that merely focuses on high risk or vulnerable individuals, because they are often influenced by other people, their families, their friends, the community they live in. And it prioritizes preventing problems, not really merely treating them after they occur. And prevention science expands the public health approach by showing that mental health and psychosocial problems can be prevented and that mental wellness and resilience can be enhanced. But there's research showing that. And there's a growing consensus that goes back many years, actually, but it's continued to grow, that the most effective way to do that is to address widespread mental health and psychosocial problems is to establish the social infrastructure in communities that we call a resilience coordinating council. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. That engages a broad and diverse array of leaders from the grassroots, civic, nonprofit, public, and private organizations. That is to say, you bring the whole system together in the community to jointly plan and implement and continually improve actions that build and sustain mental wellness and resilience among everyone, all adults and all youth, not just those who are showing symptoms of pathology in some way. So let me go through some basics and then we'll dive into how do you organize these programs. First of all, I always like to quote from Dr. Pauline Boss, and you know this very well by working with Native Americans and First Nations people. The antidote to much anguish is sheer connectedness. Being connected with other people is critical, but also, I talked to Pauline about this a while back, connected to nature is critical too. Having those connections, it's when we're isolated or feel isolated that we experience the most anguish. And what's important is that when distress is caused by these external forces that have no endpoint, no resolution, or no cure, the priority must be to build resilience to push back against the external stressors, not just merely trying to treat individuals with symptoms of pathology, although that will remain important. And because everyone is going to be impacted as the climate emergency accelerates, building population level resilience is essential, not just single person or family approaches. Again, they will be important, but just trying to do that work on its own, they will be overwhelmed by these communal and social forces. And when people experience continual distress, the strength and scope of the protective factors that exist in their communities and their families are the most important factors in preventing pathology. And the community in which people live is vital to providing and sustaining those protective factors. So what do I mean by protective factors? Again, I'm sure most of you know all of this work and I'm just repeating it for you, but these are interacting factors that buffer people from stress and trauma. They push back against it. And again, the community is vital to building and sustaining individual and group protective factors. And the individual factors interact with the communal factors. It's an ongoing process. I divide them into two types of protective factors, but this is just my own way of looking at it. I call the first set are presencing protective factors, and these enhance the capacity for self-regulation, to allow people to regulate through age and culturally appropriate means their body, mind, and emotions when distressed. So there's individual and group self-regulation skills that people learn. Sometimes they've never specifically been taught it, but they just know them. There's body-based skills, somatic skills. That just did one. You'll learn more from Elaine Miller-Karras next time when she talks, finding ways to sort of scan your body for sensations and other things. There's breath-based skills. There's thought-based skills. There's movement-based skills. There's music and art-based skills. Humor is very important when it comes to presencing or self-regulation. And I think a lot of the Native Americans use humor in that way. It's very important. But also at the same time, again, these all interact. Social supports and social support networks, being connected with close family, friends, and communities members, and cultural identity, and including your spirituality and participation in ceremonies, cultural ceremonies, is really important to calm the mind, body, and emotions in distress. And there's others, but those are sort of the broader categories. And this is vital, especially it's a necessary element of resilience. It's the starting point. But just as importantly, when it comes to the climate emergency, which means these ongoing relentless traumas and toxic stresses, purposing is also vital. And this is essentially different skills, different tools that enhance the capacity for adversity-based growth. So first, it's very hard to find adversity-based growth or to experience that. That is to say, to find something positive in a negative experience, to learn and grow and find new sources of meaning, purpose, and hope in life. People do that, but it often takes calming the mind, body, and emotions sufficiently to be able to do that. So first, presencing, then after sufficient tools, sufficient self-regulation, then purposing. And there's three, I divide this into three different areas. Again, many different skills. They're culturally and age appropriate skills. The first is to find ways to find meaning in what's happening by learning about the self and the world. And that often happens through storytelling and collective sharing that tribes are very focused on, many of them. But also tapping into the tribal and personal values, including the ethnic pride that many tribal members have. And then finding realistic sources of hope. And that's vital to purposing. So purposing is really about, how do I want to live my life in the midst of ongoing adversities? And the first, that can be achieved only if you calm yourself, you calm your body, mind, and emotions sufficiently. So those are the broad categories of protective factors. Let's take one last resilience pause here, then I'm going to dive into how you can build community-based efforts to enhance those protective factors. Again, just take a second to calm yourself in whatever way you normally use. You might just want to take a couple of deep breaths. Watch yourself breathing without trying to change anything, without any expectations. You might use another skill. Just take a moment. And as you do that, try to consider which one of the protective factors that I mentioned or other protective factors are most helpful to you when you're distressed. Are you aware of those protective factors? Do you try to reach out and tap into them? And are you aware when those protective factors are not there and what your reaction is to that? And again, if you're comfortable, please share that in chat. So I want to talk about how you can build resilience in this way. We call it transformational resilience because the focus is not on just coping with problems, it's on that adversity-based growth. You want to use the transformational resilience means using adversities to actually substantially increase well-being, well beyond where it was prior to an adversity. That's why we use the term transformational resilience. So about 2 years ago, we started a very extensive project. We had our grad students and others do research, talking with and investigating programs all over the US, community, rural and urban resilience building initiatives to find out what worked, how they organize themselves, what were the core elements. We looked at this self-healing communities program that's now no longer underway, but lasted for almost a decade in Washington State. The Communities That Care program that's very ongoing now. You ought to look at those. The SFEMA program, but also the Pittsburgh Neighborhood Resilience Project that is helping African Americans who have been traumatized by racism and other forms of systemic oppressions forever build their resilience. Peace for Tarpon in Tarpon Springs, Florida, dealing with all sorts of violence. The Neighborhood Empowerment Network in in San Francisco, and the Walla Walla Community Resilience Network. So you've got an urban and a small rural area, and many others. We also looked at international resilience building initiatives, a great deal of interesting work there, getting to talk with folks, including the Israeli Trauma Coalition's Community Resilience Center approach, and they are right in the middle of it now with the violence going on over there. The LINK approach used in Kosovo and Argentina, the Visible Hands Collaborative. I'd encourage everyone to look that up. They're trying to take an approach, integrative community therapy that was developed in Brazil and trying to grow that around the world. Is also the pilot project. So we found many successful approaches, although they weren't focused on the climate emergency yet. we took the key elements of them and wove them together to form the approach I'm going to explain to you. And then we had members of a 20-person team that we put together that really helped shape the policy and the approach I'm going to describe in a second. And these people were chosen. Some of them were ITRC board members, but others were worked in communities that were faced consistent traumas and ongoing traumas. So here's a summary of what we found done by Jack Saul. If you don't know him, you should look up his work also. How do you promote community resilience? And that is you work at the population level. And what they said, it refers to the capacity of community to overcome shared trauma and adversity via social cohesion, mutual support, hope, and the presence of communal narratives that give the experience meaning and purpose. Again, it's not just about coping. It's trying to help people learn how to grow. And it uses a resilience approach. It's not a treatment approach. You go in understanding, and this is really important with First Nations people, that families and communities are inherently competent. The fact that they're here means they're pretty darn resilient. And you help them identify the individuals, the family, the community's strengths and resources. And then with your support and encouragement and the encouragement of the entire community team, you try to help them access those strengths and resources, build new ones to solve problems and foster positive change. And it's a collaborative approach. People within the community engage as participants from planning to implementation. It's not led by mental health professionals normally. It's led by community members. The mental health professionals support those efforts. It really requires that local action and local leadership because they know the community best. They understand the culture. They understand and have the greatest trust from people. And some of the key principles are ensure that you have the community's invitation to work there, engage the entire community, especially individuals representing every cultural and ethnic group, economic status, et cetera, especially people who are respected by and can represent marginalized populations as people of color and Native Americans can often be in an urban area. And then you help them identify some key themes across generations and community history. How have our population, our community dealt with past traumas? What are the skills and strengths we have? Then you help the community map out its resources and see how those skills and strengths can help address the problems they face today. You break those down into realistic goals and tasks, and you create an action plan. And then just as importantly, as I just said before, you want to encourage community liaisons, or what we call links, who are natural change agents in the community to become leaders to engage people in these efforts. It's not the mental health community. Often we are the least respected, or there's a lot of suspicion about us that people have because they don't want to be stigmatized. They dealt with government before and got not very positive response, et cetera, et cetera. So with accelerating individual and collective traumas, we really need to start now everywhere to build community-based, culturally accountable, population-level resilience building initiatives really everywhere. And I want to now share the wheel of change to describe how you can get going. And then I'll stop in a few minutes here. And what we mean by wheel of change is each one of these spokes, each one of these are a spoke in a wheel. And you really have to make sure that over time, each part of the wheel is strong enough. Otherwise, as you start moving forward, it'll be like a flat tire that starts going flop, 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 and eventually it'll stop. I'm going to go through this linearly. You don't have to do it linearly. You can go about it, start other places. But the first step is organize a resilience coordinating council. That's our term for it. You can use whatever term that resonates in your community or your neighborhood. But the emphasis is on resilience, not treatment. So it's a prevention, wellness, and resilience focus. And the second emphasis is coordinating. You're bringing together all sorts of different activities to make sure there's coordination. So there's no overlaps, There's no gaps in what populations are being served. You really want to coordinate that. That's the key. And you want to, as we just mentioned, you want to organize a really diverse and wide set of uncommon partners to bring them together. It's not the mental health leaders or social service organizations that are treating or assisting people that show signs, or families that show signs of problems. You want to bring together everyone. So depending on what community you're in, it might be the YMCA, the YWCA, the school districts, private businesses, as well as social support organizations, et cetera, but also neighborhood groups and grassroots organizations, et cetera, and leaders. And the first thing, after you get a group of 10 to 15 together, and I'll talk about how you can do that in a second, do a back of the envelope assessment of the local strengths and local resources, what skills have happened, and what kind of traumas and stresses are likely already occurring due to climate change, directly or indirectly, even added cost because of food shortages elsewhere, et cetera, and what's likely to come your way. And then from that, you can create a vision. What does it mean in our community or in our neighborhood even to build population level wellness and resilience? What would that look like? And then from that vision, you create goals and strategies for creating that population level resilience. One of the key elements of a strategy that we've seen in all these different programs is, again, in your own unique age and culturally appropriate ways, educate everyone in basic, simple mental wellness and resilience information and skills. So first, help everyone become trauma informed. I helped everyone, I briefly mentioned how that those neurochemicals in our bloodstream create these fight, flight, freeze reactions. We'll teach everybody that, so they understand what's happening. Normalize it for people, not just the professionals. That's normally what the Becoming Trauma Informed is focused on, is helping us in the social service and mental health world understand it. Help everyone understand it, but then teach different skills that help people self-regulate themselves. At the same time, again, these are interconnected. You want to strengthen and connect social support networks across the community. You want to empower residents to take responsibility for resilience in their own neighborhood. And this is often done by forming neighborhood pods or neighborhood pubs. So when there's a distressing event, neighbors have the emails or the phone numbers of people in their neighborhood, or they just know who they are, and they contact everybody. Are you doing okay? Are you short of water? Anybody need food, et cetera? Or they just get out and walk the neighborhood and knock on doors and say, and check in on isolated people. Do you need support? They provide resources, and they provide connections to outside resources too. And that throughout the entire process, they continually evaluate what they're doing. Is it successful or not, and learn and improve their efforts. And after they've gotten enough success, it takes 3 to 5 years for a community-based initiative to mature to the point that you're really seeing success. You want to embed the practices and policies in local organization approaches and public policy. So Peace for Tarpon that I mentioned down in Tarpon Springs, Florida, the Walla Walla Resiliency Project, Community Resiliency Program in Walla Walla, Washington, and many others, they ask local organizations to incorporate resilience principles and practices into their operations for their employees, for their customers, for their stakeholders, by signing a memorandum of understanding saying, we're going to do these things. And that's a way to sort of begin to build a culture of wellness and resilience in the community. And then you also go to the local city council, the county commissioners, whatever it might be, the tribal commission, you say, we'd like you to embed those same principles and practices into local public policies. All public agencies do this kind of work for employees, stakeholders, et cetera. And you adopt different kinds of policies. So that's sort of the basics of the wheel of change. You want to keep focusing on all of those. And at some point, you might just focus first 3 to 6 months on educating everybody, helping everybody become trauma informed, and then learning skills to self-regulate, or learning purposing skills, helping people learn how to turn towards and use adversities as learning experience and find a meaning in it and find hope. And that is very critical. We can talk about how to help people find hope in a second when we take questions. And so what is the role of the mental health professionals and social service professionals? As I said, the most effective community-based initiatives that we saw and work with, we work with a lot of these programs, Fees for Tarpon and others are run by our TRC members. They're led by respected local residents, not mental health or social service professionals. And it's because, again, they have the best knowledge and trust of the community. They have the most social connections and the greatest understanding of the local culture. So just as an example, Peace for Tarpon was started by Robin Sanger. She was actually the vice mayor of the community. She looked around and saw violence everywhere in Tarpon Springs, Florida. Couldn't figure out what was going on. She finally talked to somebody and realized that the community was trauma organized. They were organized around violence, protecting themselves from violence that happened. And so she put together this steering committee that's been ongoing for many, many years. It was just run by volunteers. She's no longer vice mayor. And the mental health professionals were not the lead. They supported it. But mental health and social service professionals play very important roles. They help residents understand, as I said, how trauma and toxic stress affect their own mind, body, behavior, and affect the thinking and behavior of groups. They do training in mental wellness and resilience skills, those that have the capacity to do that. Many individual clinicians don't have that capacity. And then they try to help people learn how to run peer-to-peer programs. And that's often how these skills are shared. That it's not the mental health professionals that teach somebody a self-regulation skill. It's somebody they know, a peer who's learned the skill and learned how to teach the skill to others. So the more you can make it community-based, the better. They also serve as advisors and coaches to the Resilience Coordinating Council. They can play very important roles in helping to raise funds or bring in external resources or speakers, for example. And they also play other very important roles, including even after, because it takes 3 to 5 years to get these programs to mature, even after engaging in these efforts for a while, there's going to be some individuals that are either still cannot function or at risk of harming themselves or harming others. And the mental health professionals and clinic and social service professionals really need to engage and help them. So there's still a very vital role with them. These kind of efforts we've seen, again, none of them were really organized for climate issues. They were organized for many other types of traumas and adversities. And so if we organize community-based mental wellness and resilience building initiatives in communities around the country, in Native American, Indigenous population communities and neighborhoods, we're also going to see a great deal of potential to prevent and heal the traumas caused by human-caused emergency like community violence, addictions, ACEs, and others, and also non-climate related environmental emergencies. If these programs been in place before the pandemic, it really would have made a difference, but also earthquakes, tsunamis, many other kinds of non-climate change related issues. And one last thing is really the available research shows that community-based prevention programs save money and reduce cost for others in community and government. For every dollar invested, they tend to save between $2 to $10 in healthcare costs, criminal and juvenile justice costs, economic productivity, and the cost of mental health services, et cetera. And the LINK approach, which is run by Judith Landauer, one of our partners, they did some research and found that 5 ancillary supports are needed. That is, 5 people in the mental health or social service field are needed to replace every single family or personal friend social support for people who are distressed and experience pathologies. So we need 5 of us to help when one family member can really make the difference. And if there's more than one family member that is stressed, it's 5 and 10 and 15, up and down the whole system. So it shows how difficult and expensive it is to rely on clinical treatment and direct service programs alone. Again, they will remain important. So I would just want you to now just imagine the benefits of a Resilience Coordinating Council in Native American, Indigenous communities or neighborhoods, really focusing on enhancing the capacity for everyone to enhance their mental wellness and resilience. Can you imagine that in your community, bringing together all sorts of partners that you might not have normally worked with, and engaging them in efforts to build the entire population's capacity for wellness and resilience, not just those who have shown symptoms of pathology or psychopathology. So can you imagine that? What would it look like? And with that, actually one more thing, let me talk about how you can begin this, and then we're going to go into a breakout room and have you allow you time to talk about this. One way you can begin as a social service or mental health professional is to start with existing programs and coalitions you're already involved with. We were talking about this last week, Shasta and Angela and I, that many programs exist to restore the natural environment, restoration projects, et cetera. But the focus is on doing that external work, that external physical work. Well, one way to start these kind of efforts is to add to that an equal focus on building resilience. So you can help everyone that's involved with your plant restoration or forest restoration project or stream restoration project learn how trauma and toxic stress can affect them, and learn how skills to do that, help everyone become trauma informed, if you will. And you can teach everyone over time some simple age and culturally tailored presencing and purposing skills. And you want to place a special emphasis on helping people become aware of the existing skills and strengths and resources that they have, and or what's missing and how can they begin to build new strengths and resources, including the social connection. So not just going out and getting the stream restored, but doing that in a way that helps people come together and connect them together, connects their families together, etc. That's one way we've seen these start. And another way is just go out and try to start a resilience coordinating council. And you do this by usually, they start, given our research and talking to people, usually starts with one sort of lead person who gets interested in this, and they start talking to a couple of their friends, and they get 3 to 5 people together. They have coffee a number of times. They talk a number of times. This is really interesting. How do we do this? And they create a little vision. Here is what building population level resilience would look like in our community or in our neighborhood. And they just write it up, short paragraph. They try to, as part of that, they do some back of the envelope assessments of past and existing traditions and responses that have helped people deal with adversities, and the factors that have diminished the capacity of those traditions and capacities and skills to really be effective. And they develop sort of their back of the envelope strategy for how they want to achieve their vision of building population level resilience. And then they begin to share it widely. They go out and have coffee with people, and they share it, and lunch with people. And then they go to the city council or county commissioners, and they give a little presentation. And they go to the Rotary and the Lions Club, and on and on and on, to a number of faith organizations also. And when you do that, you just ask people to provide assistance and become engaged, who are interested. And over time, it takes 6 months to a year, depending on the community, to sort of get a network together. Then you want to carefully select some local leaders that are respected by the community, that are innovative, that are not sort of stuck in their own approach to doing things, and are not turfy, if you will, and form a core team that becomes the Resilience Coordinating Council. It can be 10 to 15, 7 to 15 people. And again, with a major emphasis on engaging people who are respected by and can serve as leaders or representatives from marginalized populations. And you grow it from there. There's more information in that document and certainly on our website. So with that, I want to stop and let's do a breakout room now. I think they're going to break you, Shasta or Angie are going to break you into 3s or 4s. And just, we're going to take 15 minutes and have you discuss how, first of all, do you see a benefit in a resilience coordinating council no matter what you want to call it, in your community or with the populations you work with? And how can you help organize a community-based, culturally accountable, population-level wellness and resilience initiative where you live or where you work? That's the first question. And second is, what initial steps can you take to begin that process in the next month? So I'm going to stop there and let Shasta, I guess it is, going to divide you up into groups. And when we come back, if you would, to the larger group, could you share what you came up with in chat? And then we'll open it up for discussion also.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and break this up into rooms. It's going to be probably 4 to 5 people per room. Never having done this before, you guys are my guinea pigs. So let's see how this works. Good luck, and we'll see you on the other side. Let's see, how many breakout rooms do I want? All right. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for the participation in the breakouts. I know that can be a little bit abrupt when you're suddenly, shoved into a room and you have no idea who's going to be there. And sometimes you look around and you think, I don't know anybody. What am I going to do? But we're back, so I'm going to go ahead and give it back to Bob and see where you want to go from here.
Great. Well, thank you. I hope you all had an interesting experience. And I should have mentioned beforehand, but I assume you introduced yourselves to each other if you didn't know each other. Hopefully you did that. If you have any comments that came up in chat that you can post in chat, that would be great. But why don't we just open it up if you just raise your hand, if you know how to do that. And then Shasta, can you just sort of pick somebody and offer a comment? What happened during your breakout session? Just, there's no agenda, just and or if there's any questions that came up, we can address those.
Yeah, sure. So I actually don't know if I have the hand raise function enabled. So, you guys know how it is with meetings with me. You can just unmute yourself and shout out or wave, and I will, I think you guys can unmute yourselves, right? Yeah, okay.
So anybody want to unmute and offer something or ask a question? Or
Don't make me call on you.
Oh, hi, this is Sarah here. I think that the first part of our conversation, we talked about just kind of like the feasibility of, having, some of these programs. So for some of us, we have more robust educational programs where maybe there is a need to like identify, someone in that program or designate someone in that program that could be kind of that liaison. And then for us here, it's a little bit different because, well, first off, both of our reservation sections are separated by Joshua Tree National Park. Some of our community members don't live, our community members don't live on the reservation. And then with the Native American Land Conservancy, we're dealing with, 5 or 6 different tribal communities. So it's kind of hard to, we have an online program, but we don't have like, that thing where we can like actually go out into the community and like, go door to door and kind of do that kind of check-in. It's kind of harder to do it that way. So that's kind of the things that we discussed. I also discussed there's a report by the Native American Land Conservancy on kind of developing like a healing landscape and healing program. So I'm going to see if I can get the PDF of that and see if I can, maybe have Shasta share that out with everyone. So it's kind of, some of the things that we discussed.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. I just one observation or comment. Is there a way by the internet to put out sort of information about what you're trying to achieve in this broader approach and ask for suggestions or ideas about how to be, to sort of build this? and maybe somebody will come up with something innovative that, you know, might be a way to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm doing right now is trying to put together kind of like a program, because we have like our learning landscape program, which, you know, we kind of have a clear goal and vision, but when it comes to this like healing program, it's a little bit, you know, a lot of the things are kind of harder to kind of like, you know, focus in on. So I guess, you know, like we're going to things like this, like, you know, this program, and seeing which way. We're also using survey forms. So we've been making like a lot of like survey and feedback forms for tribal members. So like putting up flyers and have QR codes so they can scan it if they're interested in the program, and like have like drop down. So like, you know, if they want to have an event, they can just like pick from a calendar and what subjects they're interested in. So we've been doing things like that as well.
Great, great. Well, all the best on your wonderful work there. Other thoughts, comments?
I want to point something out just that we talked a little bit about in our group, which was just that sometimes there can be a little bit of reluctance from some people. There may be cultural barriers to opening up and asking for help. So I just want to thank everybody here for their vulnerability, for the things that you shared in the chat when we had those moments of resilience with the little dinosaur picture, which I am totally going to print out and just carry with me everywhere to remind me to have a dinosaur moment. Just take a breath. You know, hopefully we won't go extinct like the dinosaurs. But thank you. I want to thank you for that. It's really meaningful to me to see that I'm not alone in some of my struggles. And Sally, I think I saw you unmute, so I'm going to kick it over to you.
Gee, you're quick. I was only unmuted for a second.
Always watching.
Well, I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed the presentation because it was thought-provoking. You know, it really made me think about, oh yeah, I had a lot of aha moments that, you know, you're going through things and you're processing it, but you don't really analyze and think about, oh yeah, this is what I'm going through, and this is, you know, what I did about it. It was very interesting, the whole presentation. And in our breakout group, we were just talking about, we introduced ourselves, and I don't think I had a chance to introduce myself, and I didn't do that in the chat because I was too busy reading everybody else's. But I recently stepped off of our tribal council after serving my tribe for over 16 years. And during that time, you know, I was always so busy doing several different things that I could never really focus my attention on one particular thing. But where I'm at up in Northern California in Lake County, you know, we are hit with wildfires every single year since 2015. And so climate change is just becoming more and more prevalent as, you know, something that we have to address. And I'm ashamed that, you know, it really wasn't something I was concerned about until, you know, recently. And so I was sharing with our group that I recently read, well, yesterday, actually, I recently read something from the Yale program on climate change that Yale was doing. And they put out something in a journal that I was reading about how, you know, people in 2008, there was only 17% that were actually alarmed. And in 2020, that grew to 26%. And I guess I'm part of that demographic because before I never really was, you know, wasn't alarmed like I am now. And in our community here up in Lake County, it's a small town. We're very rural. So our community, our Indian community has very close ties to our community at large here in the surrounding township. And so our county, we really don't have anything on that we address specifically to climate change. And some of the neighboring counties around us have created a climate action network. And so I saw a need for that. So I've been using some of the contacts that I've created over the years with being on council. You know, I meet a lot of people, I talk to a lot of different people. And so I just put out a meeting, and I got a Zoom account. So I set up a Zoom meeting, and it's very informal, very informational, and put out, hey, if you're interested in climate and you want to do something about it, and you're interested in creating a climate action network, let me know. And we'll have one for Lake County, and just model it, you know, after what the other counties are doing. And I just felt like it was a way for me to kind of address what's going on with climate. And the more that I look at this and the more information that's out there, the more alarming I get. You know, because it's like the governor is putting out his plan on, and so is President Biden, but it's almost like it's too little too late, because we are, like Bob said, we are going to have climate change. There's no way around it. We are going to go through this. And how we respond to it is what we need to focus on. And I never really thought of it that way until today. So I just wanted to thank you for having this program, Shasta, because when I saw the title and I thought, trauma, you know, resilience, it's like interesting. So I'm so glad that I zoomed in this morning and listened to your program. So
Thanks,
thank you.
Sally. I'm always delighted to have you involved in anything that I do. Sally and I go way back as TIPOs. So, you know, we have that long relationship, but I would love to be able to keep talking. And I know we can continue talking amongst ourselves. You know, in the future, we're going to keep reaching out. But for today, we've reached the 90-minute mark. So I'm going to let Angie go ahead and finish us for the day.
Thank you. Thank you all for your participation and your meaningful discussions in the breakouts. And thank you, Bob, so much for spending this time with us and providing us with such a useful set of resources and ideas to think about. All of this will be sent to you all afterwards, and we just want to make sure that we're on your calendar for June 16th. Come back and join us for actually a friend of Bob's, Elaine Miller-Karras, and the panel of tribal representatives to talk about using the community resiliency model to enhance well-being. So have a wonderful month, and we're excited to come back again.
One last thing before we take off. Marva asked if we can close with a song. So Marva, I think, were you offering to make that song for us?
Or if there was anyone else.
I'm not a singer. But if you have a song that you want to share, or anyone else want to have final words?
I can. I mean, I just wasn't sure if there was someone else who I wasn't sure.
If you'd like to, I think that would be lovely.
Okay, I can.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna turn my video off. It's just better for me.
Okay.
Gwalesham Washington Daitene Hawana Sham Gwalesham Washington Daitene Hawana Sham Hiyo Hey no hey one no Haya Hey no hey one no Haya Gwalesham Washington Daitene Hawana Sham Hiyo Hey no hey one no Haya Hey no hey one no Haya Yo Hey no hey one no Haya Shitshaw.
Oh, thank you. That was a beautiful way to end. And I thank you again, everyone, and reach out to us anytime, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Hasta luego.
Thank you.
Good job.